All right, so welcome back to the FPL Script. This is season 2, episode 1, looking ahead to the FPL 23-24 season. But we have a special guest today, and that would be FPL Chase, recently retired as well from FPL. He boasts a fantastic FPL history with 2x top 5k finishes, 6x top 20k, 10x top 100k in a 12-season career, and he's, of course, a part of the Elite 1000. He's been a Real Madrid fan as well outside of FPL since 1998. And as you guys would have known, looking at his great work on Twitter, he is a dataviz expert as well. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for the very kind words, and thanks for the invitation. And it's a pleasure.
Yeah, and thanks, Chase, for being here. Welcome back, everyone, to a new season. And I think we can just kick off this discussion about stuff revolving around visualization and, where do you find the motivation or where do you find the value in producing content like that. So I think the most popular one that, everyone always shares, everyone always knows you for the non-penalty XG rolling calendar, where you predict what is the non-penalty XG for every team going to be, and you have it divided month-wise until a certain point in the future. So walk us through how you kind of thought of it and how did you maybe perfect it to a certain extent.
Yeah, sure. Visual is basically just looking backwards. What happened over the last year, over the last 12 months, basically playing months. And the idea was, I wanted to create visual that would capture these underlying performance trends. Obviously, the first idea would be to have a line chart of sorts, where you could just easily track the evolution of the line over some period of the time. This is exactly what I wanted to avoid, and that's why I started to experiment a little. Because if you imagine 20 lines of different colors in a chart like this, I think it actually has a technical name. It's a spaghetti chart or something like that. They are basically unreadable, even though they might be technically correct, maybe more correct than what I produce, but they do not convey any meaningful information. So the idea then was basically to distill the most important thing, and that's the trend for every team individually and also in comparison. And the only thing I came up with was basically to violate the heat map visual, because normally this type of visual is being used for a different data points. So I just experimented a little, and I really like the outcome, because you don't have to really look at it long to see the basic idea or the basic trends, like which teams are clearly the best and which teams are the worst. If you then want to deep dive a little bit more, obviously there are trends that can be read from basically every line, every team, with some numbers as well. The first iterations, I was actually posting 2 decimals, but then I told myself that's maybe even too much detail for rolling averages anyway. So I decided to just use 1 decimal.
Yeah, I
think
don't
it's
know if you remember, like we had a discussion on the group chat with Simon as well, where we were talking about how expressing these kinds of things in 2 decimal is the precision that we actually don't have. So I think
exactly.
this is visually more appealing, and at the same time, I think it is mathematically more consistent with the information that we have.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with you. That was basically it. I think the visual is fairly easily decipherable for anyone, even if you are not really into analytics or into data stuff. Yeah, once you understand the metric, the visual is just talking to you. I think I would say in maybe in a few layers as well. That's what I always try with my visuals. I want some basic information to be able to be read, from the visual straight away, like from a glance. You can tell something about the data that I'm trying to visualize, and then there are also other layers, like on a closer inspection, basically. So that's basically what I try to do with this visual as well. And people reacted very very positively, even to my surprise, because I guess it was something new, and it was new because it was something that's not being done the correct way, basically.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
That's I think the main success point of this visual.
So if you don't mind, just a couple of questions. How do you like adjust for schedule difficulty? Is it just a case of looking at what is the XGC for the opponent for every week, or like how did you go about that?
So I had a T model as well running for that was the previous season. So not the season that has ended, but the previous one.
Sure.
And I had a basic idea how to calculate the team strength, and I basically just kept this part of the team model for the projections. I was not doing projections anymore. Basically, I stopped in November last year. I didn't have time to maintain the model, but the underlying team strengths themselves, that's fairly bulletproof thing I had in my model. So I was basically using that one for the adjustment, and
I
it was also
suppose.
it was also performance wise. So it was like last 8 or 9 months or something like that, underlying data in comparison, etc.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So one thing that obviously impacted all of us that engaged in data interpretation when it comes to FBref is obviously the switch that happened when they parted ways with StatsBomb, and we'll get to that later. But I am assuming that that also impacted these visualizations as well, right?
Yeah, it did. The values didn't change as much as I would expect. Like the first iteration when they changed to Opta and I had to recalculate basically everything. Yeah, there were some shifts, but overall, I mean, on a club level and with 12 games, rolling averages, yeah, the effect wasn't catastrophic. There's definitely loss in quality because StatsBomb XG is. I'm not sure if I could say by far, but it is the best. But the most work I actually had was I had to rewrite the scripts because I was scraping the data, and overnight basically they didn't just remove the model or the data from StatsBomb. They removed a lot of metrics as well. So it changed the order of the fields. You know, there were some renamings. Everything happened all at once, and it took me a few days basically to get it up and running again.
Great. I think this is actually a perfect stopping point for a break. Touching back on visuals, I just wanted to actually get a sense of another visual that you're quite well known for, which would be the radar charts. I personally am finding, at least on football Twitter, that they're starting to become very unhelpful, and we are starting to use them in a negative way just because I don't think people are, first of all, interpreting them correctly, and also the sort of creator of such radar charts aren't taking the sort of necessary effort to make sure that they're providing a fair comparison at times.
Yeah, so I suppose we want to get your take on how do you differentiate between those that you can't really gauge anything out of and those that are actually useful, and how did you go about creating radar charts of your own?
Well, I would say, well, first of all, it's a lot more complex than it looks. There are a few things you have to think about when you're trying to create a radar chart. Well, maybe the first question in your mind should be whether to use radar or pizza chart, because again, technically speaking, radar chart isn't a good chart. The order of the values or the order of the metrics can change the shape of the radar basically, or of the shaded area. And well, you can manipulate it in a way that even though a player or any entity that you are trying to visualize might be better, if you reorder, you can get like shaded half of the visual, and it looks like wow. And then if you reorder the metrics, you're also able to create something that would resemble a star or something like that. It wouldn't basically fill out the chart at all, and this would be maybe the same player or the same entity you are trying to visualize. So radar charts by themselves can be quite misleading. So the thing here is that if it was up to me, I would probably only use pizza charts because they're technically more correct. But the comparison with pizza chart is terrible. It's so difficult to read. So that's why I always resort to radar charts. But yeah, I usually do radars only when I'm comparing players. Like a player alone, I would always go for a pizza chart. I think it's easier to interpret, and as I said, it's also technically more correct. Then the second question is, what do you want to what do you actually want to visualize, whether it's actual values or percentiles, because you see a lot of maybe not radar charts, but actually these sort of pizza charts that don't even quote, like the values of the metrics. They are just you can only read out the percentiles. And I mean, I have nothing against it. It's one way or another. What suits you, what you maybe are better in interpreting, but it's another consideration. And then what you already said, which metrics, in what order. This is a really difficult one because the way I approached it was basically to divide the canvas into attacking, possession, and defending parts. And I was trying to pick representative metrics for the positions. That's why you use these templates, defender template or wide midfielder template, defensive midfielder template, whatever. And I think it makes a lot of sense. That's maybe one of the first things. And also the metrics. Well, what I'm trying to do is kind of go gradually between obviously the most attacking metrics like XG and shots. You would start the chart with that. I'm not sure if it's the right way to do, but I think it makes sense to me because I've seen a lot of radar charts that, for example, for strikers or I don't know something, and they start with something that didn't really make sense to me. And even if the start was okay, then the order of the subsequent metrics to me was kind of random. I couldn't really see any logic, but I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Anyway, so I try to go like XG and shots, like because this is the most attacking metrics. Then you go to something that approximate assists, whether that's expected assists or chances created, shot creating actions, things like this. Then I'm also trying to go to the, let's say, possession metrics that are more attacking or basically tell you more about the attacking prowess of the player, which would be like take-ons or progressive carries, progressive passes, etc. And then we move basically through some other metrics until we go to the defensive part of the radar. So this sort of division of metrics made the most sense to me, and it took me some time to go about it and to find something that I was satisfied with from the perspective of how would somebody like approach this radar chart, how would somebody read it. Another thing to point out, and maybe but most people don't actually realize, is that the radar charts you see and also mine are not using the actual extreme values. So the end of the radar charts, like the highest value is not actually the highest value in your data set. It's you do a cutoff of these values for some percentile. This is also basically up to you whether you use 99, 90, 95th percentile or something like that. Because obviously, if we have somebody like, let's say, Haaland in the data set, every striker in the world would look like amateur, basically. Yeah. So you want to make the target values, the top values, a little bit lower, so that also other players could look like a competent competent players in their positions as well. And then also the comparison. I think that's probably the last thing that I wasn't particularly satisfied with, like the default FBref comparisons and percentiles, because I do not know how they actually treat the positions. I think they do not treat them basically. So you have metrics for a player like, let's say, I say like Kai Havertz for last 365 days, and then you can click through. Okay, how does he look like compared to midfielders? And then you have a click through for attacking midfielders and wingers, or maybe strikers. I'm not sure which different templates you have there, but the metrics stayed the same, And this is not correct, because obviously he would look like a god to a normal central midfielder, and he would also look like incompetent winger. But he's basically none of it, and I think you should only take the metrics from the games where he was actually registered playing that position. This is not what you see on FBref. So.
Yes.
So this was one of the driving things. I told myself, okay, so I will be creating some radars for myself, and then maybe some of them I will publish, because I have a total control about what I'm actually filtering. So when you see, example, like the one where I compared Declan Rice with Caicedo,
Yeah.
So I made sure that they are just the midfield. Well, they're maybe not the best comparisons because they always play in midfield. But I always try to filter out those positions that actually do not fit the profile I want to compare.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
No, but I think the biggest takeaway from all of this is, first of all, the radar charts are extremely prone to the way you structure them, as you said, and it can
Yes.
influence someone very easily. The way you structure the metrics around. And also, the second thing I gather is you've put a fair deal of thought into how you want to maybe have the transition from, let's say, attacking stats into position and into defense. Because that's like a natural transition. You can go either way, but all I'm saying is there's a method to how you structure those metrics. And I did not know about that. So that's actually a great insight for me as well.
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
promote it, but as I said, any visual I was creating, I was the first audience is basically me. So I want to be, I want it to satisfy me in the first place. So it has to have some internal logic or integrity to it. I wouldn't feel good just throwing around metrics in random order and then posting it on Twitter or something like that.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's what we've seen, a rise of these kinds of radar charts, which make no sense sometimes, where they have irrelevant stats, as you pointed out. I think that's the biggest point, where if you're looking at XG for, let's say, the same example, Caicedo versus Rice, it makes no sense because it's neither of their jobs to generate XG. So what's the point in even looking at a metric like that?
Yeah. For
Yeah,
example,
yeah,
you
yeah.
could even argue that any attacking metric doesn't really make sense. But that's also the discussion that you want to see what's not there. You want to see that they are not taking shots or not generating anything attacking wise, even though you're not expecting them to. But there are players that play in central midfield that do that. Yeah, I mean they're not great at generating XG, but they are at least trigger happy. That they take a lot of shots, for example.
I guess that kind of ties up with the one of those other charts that I think many people have requested you to do or to update regarding certain players, which is rolling XG delta. Personally, I think this is one of my favorite charts. Firstly, because of the color scheme that you've used, I think it's quite brilliant with the way it contrasts. The lines contrast the background, and you can clearly see how certain players have progressed throughout their careers. So, do you think that this chart in particular, you found it useful, for example, while you're assessing someone like Heung-min Son, who in the chart that we've displayed on YouTube, you can clearly see that he is a career over finisher to a large extent. Like it's comparable to someone like Messi, even though it's for a shorter duration. It's quite impressive. So,
It is. It is.
what were the
Yeah.
takeaways from that?
So first of all, I have to say this design is not mine. It's not original design. I think the first one was someone from Statsbomb. Yeah, James York, I think.
Yes,
I
yes,
think it
yes.
was James York. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then I basically I've seen it then in the FPL Trout or is FF
yes.
Trout or something like
FF
that.
Cloud.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I have seen it in one of his shit posts. He basically regenerated it and made fun of Benteke or something like that. Actually, not even making fun. I think he was tracking him coming back to normal. It didn't really work out for Benteke either, but yeah. Anyway, yeah, I when I seen it for the first time, I told myself, "Wow, this is a great whiz," and yeah, I just put on a few more touches, so I made it a little bit maybe more aesthetically pleasing, but the design is not mine. So I knew exactly what I was doing when I was creating this chart. Like I had the original right before my eyes, basically.
Yeah, fair enough. If you have a blueprint, it does make it easier, right?
Yeah, and regarding scouting, no. So the chart, if we talk about let's say a big five since 2017, 18, there is a lot of players, and there is basically a lot of lines here that you cannot optically see. And the generating of this chart takes 15 to 20 minutes. So it's not very practical for just trying out random players
Yep,
to
yep.
see how they fare. So I usually had an idea which players I want to visualize, and no, this is definitely not some sort of scouting tool for me or something like that. It's really just an eye-catching visual of let's say the usual suspects on both spectrums, the good ones and also the bad ones. they really stand out because all of these underlying lines tell you basically where we are when we talk about some average players or average careers, and then here are the aliens of this sport.
I think one of the better users of this kind of graphic is we have a lot of anecdotal evidence, right? For example, this guy is an insanely clinical finisher based on maybe 5 games that you've seen. But when you actually plot it out like this, you might find out that, oh, look at this, they're reverting to almost zero, which means that maybe they had some luck during the time you actually watched them play. And when you were perhaps not watching or you were not paying attention, they had terrible luck. Or maybe you didn't even register those chances that they missed because you tend to forget about them more than you remember, those insanely clinical finishes from outside the box or something.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And somewhere along these lines is also Lewandowski, who
Yes.
basically has a really big dip right in the middle of this chart. And it just shows that a widely respected forward, one of the best of his generation, if not the best center forward in the last decade at least, was also going through a really tough finishing spell. So it happens. I mean, this is football.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a chart like this helps contextualize a lot of things when your eye test or your memory is perhaps not the greatest indicator of a player's finishing ability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Agree.
Just because this ties up with what I have mentioned previously, again, just to kind of wrap up that point on FBref and StatsBomb parting ways, and you having worked with both StatsBomb and Opta, I'm just wondering if you have noticed anything significant. I mean, I know you said that it didn't make a lot of difference for the rolling XG chart, but I'm wondering if you noticed any positives, any negatives when it comes to the whole changing of the data source itself. Because one thing I realized that we lost a few metrics, like carries, I think, right? We lost carries per 90.
Yeah, I think we lost a lot of
And also
pressures. Carries were recently
brought back, right?
reintroduced.
Yeah.
So they're back there for
Yeah.
anyone who is looking forward to scrape them. They are there again. But pressures are gone.
Yeah. And also some other metrics that came into the picture, like for example, forwards XA and backwards XA, where when we were working with StatsBomb, we only had XAG, technically speaking, because we only looked at XG assisted.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. So do you think that, in the beginning, I was extremely upset about it, but of course I had to get over it because it's a free data source. They have no obligation to stick to StatsBomb. But I guess, once you're over the initial disappointment, do you feel like it's okay? I mean, you can still carry on doing what you were doing even with the new data source?
Absolutely. As I said, there is definitely a loss in some precision. The people who would mostly feel it were people who built their models, their team models or any kind of models. I think they would definitely lose some precision in the underlying performance data. If you, for example, have built a team model that you use maybe for some competitive purposes, or I don't know, you're trying to bet based on it or something like that, you have definitely lost. Lost some kind of edge. This is undeniable. But for a regular consumer, I don't think there is anything really to complain about. For a regular user, it's still amazing resource. If you think about it, what you can find there for free, it's truly amazing. So even though they changed the provider, the advanced metrics provider, I still think they are doing an amazing job in popularizing analytics and making these things free for hobbyists like myself and many others. It's not just about FPL. It's about basically everything, every leagues they cover in detail. Everyone who wants to maybe showcase their work and maybe find maybe find a job in football analytics, etc. This is truly amazing playground, and I think it does a lot for data and analytics propagation for a larger audience. If all of these metrics, all of this data was locked away in how would I say it?
Like behind
in vaults,
paywalls. Behind paywall.
we would lose so much free content that's out there. It's
That's actually a great point. It's more towards the availability of data. And I remember I came to you asking for StatsBomb data, and I'm glad that you are one of those very few FPL players, or maybe like I think just data enthusiasts in the world who actually had StatsBomb data until a very recent point before they switched over. So um,
Yeah. I remember. I think I
yeah.
actually I gave you the link to the script data. Yeah.
Yeah. You just gave me the data for the 5 leagues because I was creating my World Cup model, and I could not switch to Opta because then I would have had to go back and change everything to Opta data, and that was just not possible with the amount of effort I had already put in. So yeah,
Understand.
something like that, I definitely appreciate it, and that's why I think it's very important to have a community as well, where you have like-minded enthusiasts who sometimes can save your skin quite literally.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
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 All right, so moving on from the sort of Viz segment, we thought, of course, one of the things that are very apparent looking at your Twitter is that you're a Real Madrid fan. How did that really start?
I think it was one of the first Champions League finals I watched. That was in '98. It wasn't the first one. I definitely watched. I think it was Juventus against Borussia Dortmund in '97, if I'm not mistaken. I definitely watched that one as well, and I think I have watched Ajax playing final too. But anyway, it was one of the first finals where I was tuned in as a fan, as a football fan already, and yeah, it took my I don't know. I was a kid and they won, and I was like all in. They are great. I love them. It was also the year of the World Cup, so as you can imagine, the hype for kids before a World Cup is huge. So football was a topic number one long time before the World Cup even came, with Ronaldo, being the poster boy with his mercurial vapor Nike commercials. It was it was fun times for a kid like me, and I don't know. I just started to love them, and then in 2000 when they won 3-0 in the final, I was like, okay, so this is a club. I mean, they're for real. They're great. And since then, I've never felt anything like that for any club, and I don't know. It never changed. So I'm just a Real Madrid fan since childhood. I went through periods where I felt like, oh, these are dark ages. I don't want to be a fan anymore. But you eventually always stick as a fan, and then you also get to enjoy the glory days. And boy, oh boy, we had some glory days recently. I still, as someone who was totally frustrated by Messi in like 2010 and 2011, I really felt sometimes I really felt like I should be ashamed to be a Real Madrid fan even.
Was it the
And
season that you guys played each other 6 times? Because there
it
was a
was
season
20.
where you played in the cup, in UCL, and in the league twice.
That was 2011. I think yes, that's correct.
Yeah, yeah,
I think. Well, we went twice in semifinals of UCL with Mourinho,
yeah, yeah.
I think. But anyway, yeah, those were the dark ages, and then came La Decima, and everything changed completely. Like the experience for me of being a Real Madrid fan now is utter bliss. Like they do basically everything right. I compare it to any other club in the world. I don't know. I don't know if I would be so satisfied with the club as I am with Real Madrid.
Okay, so let's actually move on swiftly towards FPL. The biggest thing we'd like to go with first is just talking about Analytics FC and the idea that the edge is slowly diminishing year on year. What do you generally think about the landscape of FPL?
I think it's definitely true that if we consider Edge working with data and maybe using points projections for your decision making in very broad sketches as a general point, then the Edge is definitely diminishing every day. Right now, even the biggest providers and the biggest services in FPL world are launching their own optimization. Obviously, they already have their own expected value. I think it's getting more popular every day. I think it's becoming the norm to use the data for every FPL player. I think nowadays that wants to take the game seriously and wants to be competitive will be using some sort of, let's say, expected value. Uh, and yeah, I think it will be increasingly difficult to compete against the crowd. And I don't know. From my perspective, the only true edge left if I come from the point where I expect that the cohort of my direct competitors, which I would estimate at least 200,000 people, as we say, I would expect them all to have an access to a model of some sorts, to a solver of some sorts, etc. So the only edge against this crowd, against the cohort that are my real competitors in the game, is actually to be super obsessed with English Premier League, with following the clubs very closely, have a good read on expected minutes, basically playing time going forward, not only from game week to game week, but also long term, like what tactical shift will promote this such and such player playing time in the near future, maybe in long term. If you can predict these trends, you have some edge over the others, because obviously you will be there sooner, at least by a few game weeks, which is all that matters right now. So this is also one of the reasons why I quit this season, because I'm no longer in a position where I have the time and energy to focus that much, to follow EPL that closely, to follow every presser on Friday, to basically try and guess what's going to happen with this and that club, without being reliant on somebody else's information, because I think that also kind of diminishes your edge if you do not make these sort of leaps of faith, or maybe if you do not exercise your judgment in, I do not want to say in isolation, but yeah, at least you are able to formulate your own opinion on things, on the developments in every EPL club, then you are losing already the edge. Because if you are relying on some threats or something like that every week, there are thousands of players, tens of thousands of players that will see the same information as you do, which might not even be correct. This is the important part, that I personally would not trust the second-hand information. And when I do not have the time and energy to create my own opinions and to formulate my own judgments, I don't know. I think the edge is already lost, and it would be very tough for me to compete against the crowd that has this, that has the time, that is better informed, that has the time, to even change their teams 1 hour before deadline because of leaks.
Yeah.
For me, this is really difficult, to keep up with. And this year it would be probably impossible. And this is something that, like a pure model game, sure, you might get there. There is also a whole level or whole layer of variance, etc. But you're kind of losing control over the situation. Somebody would tell you that it's overthinking or something like that. But from my experience, this is not overthinking. This is just paying very close attention. And I have tried actually not to pay this much attention and be a lot more relaxed, just following projections and not inject any context of my own, etc. And it didn't work for me either. So I came to this conclusion that I no longer have the prerequisites to be competitive in this game anymore.
I guess this also sort of plays into the question that we had, which was, does playing analytically improve how you emotionally react to results?
Yeah, for me, even if I play analytically, for me it's still difficult to accept bad game weeks. It still takes some time to breathe through it, and this hasn't changed in all of these years. So I don't think it would change anytime soon. Even though I'm not maybe that much emotionally involved as I once was, I was still very emotionally involved, and the game experience itself basically went from enjoying good game weeks and being competitive to just expect good game weeks and hurt through bad game weeks. So when I in last season, when I had a good game week, it was like, okay, fine, this is what we aim for. Nothing special happening here. But when I had a truly terrible game week, it hurt the same. So the emotions in my spectrum shift to the negative, because I was only going through strong emotions when something wasn't going my way. When it was going my way, it was as expected, because you invest a lot of time, you invest a lot of energy, so obviously you will be doing well. This is not a surprise. You're not winning in a lottery when you somehow find yourself in top 20k in game week 20 or something like that. This is what we want. This is why you're spending so much time on this game. But if it's not the case, if you find yourself in 300k or something, that could be brutally demoralizing. And I'm just like character-wise, I'm not the person that could say, this is fine. I will just play with the same enthusiasm as if nothing happened. It just doesn't work for me. Like I need the feedback loop. I need the feedback to be positive for me to invest that time and that energy. If the feedback isn't there, I'm not doing this for money. I should be doing this for pleasure. And when pleasure is not there, what else is there?
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, Virog on FPL had maybe not word for word a similar thought process, but I think he went through something similar with him not being able to commit the time necessary. And I kind of understand where you're coming from with the negative feedback loop, especially because I had a terrible season last year with almost -100 negative variance, and I don't know how I pulled myself through it, but I don't know if I can go through another season of such bad luck, because it's, as you said, we are putting in so much time and effort, and if it is not correlating with success, it does become quite difficult to motivate yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can imagine for some people this is not an issue, but it definitely is and was an issue for me.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. So one more thing that we, I think you're well known for within the FPL community in general, is having a direct line to the FPL GOAT, at least as of date, that is Fabio. Just kind of give us a background as into how you guys interacted in the beginning. How did this friendship come to be, and whatever you can divulge about your interactions with Fabio in general.
Yeah, sure. So I met him virtually in 2016. On Facebook, basically, there was a FPL Facebook group. There were plenty of us, basically. This was basically the start when we started interacting, like in a group. And it was quickly obvious that he was a very thoughtful player, that he knew what he was doing, and also he wasn't like, I think at first he just wanted to be good at the game, but then later he wasn't ashamed about talking about his goals to be a Hall of Famer. So he's a very determined player. He's very detailed oriented. Let me put it this way. So he really does know what happens English Premier League, even though he's not visible in your Twitter sphere. He follows everything very, very closely. Like he's up to speed with all of the team leagues. You basically won't surprise him with any league.
Wow, that's impressive, actually.
On Saturday morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, as I said, very very tuned in player, very nice person actually, like a genuinely nice person. He doesn't possesses the ego of FPL goat or something like that. This is really not him. But yeah, as I said, very very determined. So he really wants to do well. He invests a lot of time into the game. Yeah, he's a model user as well. He also has his own data that he has some sort of a crude EV model for his own purposes. I've never talked much detail about it with him, but I have seen something. I don't want to go. I don't want to
Yeah,
go.
sure.
And yeah, I didn't talk to him through all these years. When basically when we stopped interacting on Facebook, it's like in 2019, something like that. I haven't heard from him for a few seasons, and then I came back to him when he was already the widely regarded GOAT, and that was like one of the last pushes I was trying to make in this game to learn from him, to pick his brains, to ask him questions, how he thinks about different issues, maybe about topics in FPL, like get the general feeling, what are maybe his priorities, what is the thought process, etc. So he was also always very generous with his opinions. As I said, very 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 nice guy, and also very very down to earth. Just like a good guy to chat FPL with, because he, as I said, he knows. Yeah, he's well informed.
Yeah. So, I'm just curious. Does he know that the majority of people on Twitter like regard him as the goat?
Yeah, he is aware. He's aware, even
Okay.
though he isn't following it himself because
Yeah.
he really doesn't have an account. Like it's true, he doesn't have an account.
Yeah.
He sees things. People who talk to him more often than I do, they inform him about things that are happening around his personality. And obviously, when you're top of Hall of Fame. You expect that people talk about you. He's getting invitations, from many people to talk, to go on a pod or something like that. This is no secret that he's in demand. So
Oh yeah, 100%. So is he just opposed to the idea of appearing on a podcast just because he's a private person, I assume?
Um, I never went in a lot of detail in this. I just know he's not a fan of the idea that he would talk about himself on a podcast. Maybe it will come one day. I don't know.
So, for
Not sure.
example, we are in the group chat with Magnus Carlsen's coach, right? And he has been very clear since day one that Magnus is never going to appear on a podcast about FPL because he considers FPL to be a hobby. So I was wondering if it's something similar with Fabio, that maybe it's because you've said that he is a very down to earth person, and maybe he doesn't like the spotlight, so it would make sense, because I think the closest he's come to that is, I think, the video that FPL Focal put out, where I think he communicated with
Yes,
him
yes,
through, I guess, emails or text messages.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
That's correct. To be honest, I really don't know.
yeah.
I never specifically asked about this. I don't want to make any assumptions. I
No,
just
of course,
know,
of course.
yeah, I just know he's a private person and
Yeah, yeah,
he likes that to stay yeah, he likes it to stay that way.
yeah.
That's
I hope someone
basically it.
has shown him the parody account that FF Trout has converted his to for being number one Fabio fan. I don't know if you remember that, but
Yeah,
there
yeah,
was a,
yeah,
yeah, where he had actually gone to quite a length to make himself appear as the number one Fabio fan on Twitter, and it was quite something. I mean, I found it to be
yeah.
truly hilarious.
Yeah, it was great entertainment,
Yeah,
definitely.
exactly.
I think just moving on from Fabio and switching back to this season for the 23-24, we are starting to see once again the pricing being affected. I think We Rogue as well on Twitter had shared a very useful graphic detailing how a lot of the players who would have returned great amounts of points in previous seasons, particularly around your, let's say, 6 million to even 10 million worth of midfielders, or your 5 to even 6 million of defenders, have all dramatically decreased in price in respect to previous seasons. So what do you generally feel about the impact on pricing? Because I know despite your retirement, you have sort of actively vocalized some of your concerns on Twitter.
Yeah, from competitive point of view, it's definitely bad news. The way they structured the pricing, that you can basically hop on literally anyone at any point of time in the season, double game weeks, blanks, doesn't matter. You can just get the best players in your squad, most probably, even with very low TV, even very low team value. It's not great for competitiveness. That's for sure. The perspective of FPL, I kind of get it. I think, well, the obvious idea here is FPL is becoming largely a global game. It's not about English or UK fans anymore. It's a global game. I mean, it was always a global game, but right now it's super global game. It has a global reach, and I think I think the basic idea behind the pricing is just you want your players, you want your audience to be able to pick your favorite players, yeah, and to pick the team with as many of them as possible. You don't want to be forced to pick players from bottom half teams, whether that's defenders, midfielders, or even forwards. I mean, you want to please your audience. You want them to pick their Chelseas, their Manchester Uniteds, their Liverpools, to have all of their favorite players in their team, and um, and get the experience of fantasy while watching EPL, etc. So I'm not blaming FPL for this move. I know exactly why they are doing it, and it should promote higher interaction even among non-competitive players or players that do not care that much. And it's basically the two worlds of this game, and we have to accept it. For competitiveness, it's bad idea. Maybe even for the game design, I'm not sure. Somebody more clever might have an opinion on this. That the game design with this pricing probably makes less sense, and but I don't know. I'm not sure. Anyway, from my perspective as a seasoned FPL player that would approach the season, I know because every season is the same. I know there would be some absolute bargains that will emerge throughout the season from anywhere. Like you can count on it. So the initial pricing should not be so permissive that it allows you already to build an amazing team. From my perspective, it should be the way that it's actually very difficult to have the best players and to have, I don't know, maybe more than 5 players from the top 6 teams. With this very relaxed pricing, I'm not even sure such things as super bargains will even matter. I mean, it will be definitely great if some budget defender overscores at some point his expectations, but if you can build your backline from the top 6 teams and not even from random defenders, but basically the best assets, defensive assets in their team, and then you move on to midfield, where I think the only midfield priced about 10 million is Salah. Am I correct here?
Yeah, I think De Bruyne as
Yeah.
well.
De Bruyne,
De Bruyne. Sorry. So
Yeah.
there are 2 of them. It's just
Yeah.
crazy. I mean, you can have a top 6 midfield if you want. Yeah, it was never like that, and I'm not sure. I mean, the game was definitely different a few years ago. I don't know, guys. What do you
No,
think?
but
I will not be playing the games.
yeah, no, but I think you're definitely right in the sense of anecdotally, if you think about previous seasons, like for example, the famous Lundstrom season, or even Riyad Mahrez in his first season at Leicester, you remembered those because they were the anomalies. They were one of a kind.
Yeah.
But now it's the case where because most of the players are maybe underpriced or maybe they are accessible, you don't even have great memories of, oh, I went for this lower priced player and it paid off because it's accessible to everyone. So everyone is going to own Bruno, for example. Everyone is going to own Rashford. Everyone is going to own Holland. Everyone. So it's become a case of I don't know, because I think FPL is also a game of bragging rights. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
it kind of has diminished in that sense as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
The likes of Lundstrom, that was super extreme, but I think there was even Patrick Van Aanholt.
Yeah.
That too. I mean, he was great for a few seasons, but I think there was Van Bissaka. Van Bissaka had this season in Crystal Palace where he was like really good on bonus or something like that, and
Yeah. 4
we were
million.
cheering him on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
he was super cheap, and he delivered. I don't know. I don't remember exactly, but definitely lower than top 6 defender like of your choice. But we still loved him because he was so cheap and he delivered the points. But when you can actually pick Gabriel or let's say Luke Shaw will have a season without injuries, then what's the point of cheap defender anyway? I mean, these guys will definitely outscore them.
And I think, Fran, if I'm not wrong, you also kind of pointed that out, right? That the 4.5 defenders are so easily accessible that you don't really need to risk anything with the 4 million defender.
Yeah, 100%. I think the fact you can access Botman, a nailed 4.5 defender for what was last year's second best defense, is a little bit outrageous. The early fixtures aside, in reality, pricing should be for the long term, and you have an asset who is too good in terms of long-term value. Ultimately, what's happening is it seems like your skill floor is being raised and the ceiling hasn't really moved if it hasn't gone down. And so if you're, let's say, a less engaged player, a bit more of a casual coming into game week 1 this year, it's more than conceivable you can create a super team for game week 1. And I think another thing too, you could argue, is that there's just going to be a bit more variance with so many players who will be part of squads that have the highest DV possible. And it's concerning because your source of points are no longer really from your 1 or 2 different players and your niche players, but more so really the combination of 11 crazy players, with maybe the exception to Holland.
Yep.
Well, that was this season's pricing anyway. So, I mean, moving ahead, I think the one thing that we touched on just before our conversation started was on evaluating ranks and going back to the idea that, of course, a lot of us obsess over an absolute rank, such as a top 10K finish. And one thing that I find quite interesting coming from an esports background is you have the concept of elo just like in chess, and a lot of people are, for example, looking at percentile finishes too. I know that changes based on what you consider the active player base to be, but things like that. And ultimately, given the sort of recency of how people have become engaged, you're now seeing managers who are looking at their 3-year ranks, 4-year ranks instead, as a way to evaluate themselves as managers. Because I just remember looking at, the recent 3-year rank weightings and just looking at a manager who I believe was 6th with some really great finishes, but in the past, unfortunately, having 1.5, 2 million finishes, that just completely disqualifies their weighting really as a manager. Do you have any thoughts as to both things really?
I think FPL Research is doing the job well. I mean, it's amazing. He's doing it as responsible as he could. And regarding the goal of top 10K, it's definitely an outdated one. It was really established a long time ago, and it doesn't bear the same relevance anymore. It is what it is. It's just difficult to move away from it. It's just difficult to accept that top 10K now is maybe top 30K. I don't know. Maybe top 20K last season, maybe top 30K this season, because the field is getting increasingly better every season. This goes also with number of players, but also with experience these players gain over the seasons. So you have now tremendously experienced players who have access to any analytical help they want to demand. They can basically pick a brand of their favorite analytical tool. I don't want to go into discussions about quality, but it is what it is. And yeah, top 10K is no longer viable. It's just some old-fashioned thing. But for me, I also always clung onto it. Also last season, I really wanted to get a top 10K finish. It
You
didn't
missed
happen
out
again.
because of a Kane captaincy, right?
Yeah, I captained Rashford in the last
Yeah.
game week, and I mean, I had it on Kane, of course, 5 minutes before the deadline. I had it, but I also had it on somebody else, maybe Salah or something like that, like 8 minutes before deadline. So I was switching between these three mindlessly because you cannot find any before deadline. You will not find any convincing, reliable data point that will move you. It's just where you land in the last gasp. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I landed on Rashford, and I got a little bit unlucky with that pick, and it basically meant that I fell. Uh, I fell from something from inside top 10K outside of it, and it basically killed me. It killed me so much. I realized that last game week that what I do here doesn't make any sense anymore. It's difficult. It's just very hard to get that rank. At least it was for me. Personally, I felt like I played the most complete season last season of all my seasons. I don't even remember one significant blunder. You always make some small mistakes, and all of my previous seasons had some really terrible decisions baked in them. This season, I really don't remember. And I was using data. I was like trying to even blend the EVs from different models. I discussed things with people. Like I used everything I learned over the career, and I put it into practice this season because this was the season I really wanted to get that finish. I really wanted for me to show myself that I have learned something and I can deliver. And this killed me, man. This really killed me. I invested so much energy and time into last season, and it was basically no use. Like my last three finishes are like 18K, 16K, 14K. I don't know what order are these, but it's between 10 and 20K. And I kind of lost faith that I can move. I can move from there. It's like I accepted that this is my ceiling right now, and it's probably only going to get worse. So
I mean, honestly,
yeah.
I think most FPL managers will give the right hand for finishes like that. But I understand that you have higher aspirations because you've already had a lot of high finishes in earlier seasons. I think using your own logic, the finish that you had last season is definitely amounting to top 10K a few seasons ago. Just because
Oh,
given the
definitely,
competition.
definitely.
Yeah. So I think
Definitely,
it was
but
quite a
yeah, but
feat.
it
Yeah.
won't satisfy me.
Yeah. I know. I know. I know.
I
I know.
know I played a lot better than when I achieved my first top 3K or something like that. I
Yeah.
know that
Yeah. Yeah.
that's it's not denying, and I think a lot of players, experienced players, would tell you the same. I mean, they played the game a lot worse maybe 5 years ago, but had drastically better finishes. You can also argue about variance, etc. But yeah, it is what it is. It's increasingly difficult. Not for everyone, I guess. Some players are still achieving those heights of top 1K, and yeah, I admire these guys. If you are consciously aiming for something like that, and you can deliver it in this era of FPL, you must be really special decision maker. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, true. And also, I mean, just to point it out, the fact that Chase achieved quite a remarkable feat of scoring the same number of points in 2 seasons in a row,
Yeah,
which,
yeah.
if you look at it, it just feels quite surreal because I know you wanted a higher finish, but just from a challenge point of view, like if you were to take up a challenge in FPL, I think one of those quite impossible ones would be to get the same number of points because you hardly have any control over it.
Yes, that's true, and I didn't even notice it
Yeah,
myself at
yeah,
first because I was so sick about the season. I didn't even look at it. Like, okay, it's done, but it definitely feels special.
yeah,
In
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's fun. I mean, I would definitely exchange it for top 10K finish if you ask me.
Of course you will. So yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Chase, for coming on the pod. We really appreciate you. I talk to you not that infrequently, and I hope to interact with you even more. I think you're one of the better FPL managers that I know, and I try to take inspiration from the content that you create as well as how you play FPL. So yeah, I hope you stick around at least from an interaction perspective. And Fran, do you have something to add?
No, absolutely not. Well, other than the fact that I hope once again we probably come closer to some great heights as Real Madrid fans this season, and looking forward to watching some games with you this year.
Thank you, guys. Very kind words. I really appreciate it. I will definitely stick around. As I said, the intensity will be probably lower because of yeah, my general situation. But yeah, I definitely want to stick around. My DMs are also always open. Thank you. Thanks a lot
Yep.
for this opportunity to talk to you.